Okay, do you remember what happened in chapter 10? Emeth, the Calorman soldier, wanted to go into the stable. He was in there for a second. A dead Calorman soldier was thrown out, but it wasn't Emeth. And then the ape and Rishta Tarkin decided that they're going to start throwing Narnians into the stable one at a time to face whatever scary thing is in there. And they decide that the boar is going to be the first one they throw in. But the boar says, "Come and get me, look at my tusks." And when Tyrion saw his faithful subject, the boar, who was going to fight on his own to protect himself, Tyrion couldn't handle it anymore. And he looked at Jill and Eustace and Jewel and Poggin and Farsight, probably not Puzzle, because Puzzle isn't much of a fighter, but he looked at all of them and he said, "This is it. We have to go out and help now. Now is when we're going to fight." Chapter 11, the pace quickens. Quick as lightning, once Tyrion jumped out with his sword and yelled that he was there for all the Narnians, remember at the end? Rishta Tarkin leaped back out of reach of the king's sword. He was no coward, and he would have fought single-handed against Tyrion and the dwarf, if need be. But he could not take on the eagle and the unicorn as well. He knew how eagles can fly into your face and peck at your eyes and blind you with their wings. And he'd heard from his father, who had met Narnians in battle, that no man, except with arrows or a long spear, can match a unicorn. For it rears on its hind legs, and as it falls upon you, and then you have its hoofs and its horn and its teeth to deal with all at once. So he rushed into the crowd, and he stood calling out, to me, warriors of the Tisroc, may he live forever. To me, all loyal Narnians, lest the wrath of Tashlon fall upon you." So I wonder if any Narnians are going to go on his side. While this was happening, two other things happened as well. The ape had not realized his danger as quickly as the Tarkhan. For a second or so, he remained squatting beside the fire, staring at the newcomers, Tyrion and the children, and Farsight and Poggin and Jewel. Then Tyrion rushed upon the wretched creature, picked it up by the scruff of the neck, and dashed back to the stable, shouting, "Open the door!" Poggin opened it. "Go and drink your own medicine, Shift." And Tyrion hurled the ape, threw it into the darkness. But as the dwarf banged the door shut again, a blinding green-blue light, it's greenish blue, shone out from the inside of the stable. The earth shook, and there was a strange noise, a clucking and screaming, as if it was the hoarse voice of some monstrous bird. What do you think that is? The beasts moaned and howled, and they called out, "Tashlon, hide us from him!" And many fell down, and many hid their faces in their wings or paws. No one except Farsight the eagle, who has the best eyes of all living things, noticed the face of Rishta Tarkan at that moment. And from what Farsight saw, he knew at once that Rishta was just as surprised and nearly as frightened as everyone else. There goes one, thought Farsight, who has called on gods that he does not believe in. How will it be with him if they have really come? The third thing, which also happened at the same moment, was the only really beautiful thing that night. Every single talking dog in the whole meeting, and there were 15 of them, came bounding and barking joyously to the king's side. Can you see them there? That's not all 15 of them, but that's some of them. So all the dogs are joining their side. That's good. They were mostly great big dogs with thick shoulders and heavy jaws. Their coming was like the breaking of a great wave on the sea beach. It nearly knocked you down. For though they were talking dogs, they were just as doggy as they could be. And they all stood up and put their front paws on the shoulders of the humans and licked their faces, all saying at once, "Welcome, welcome, we'll help, help. Show us how to help, show us how." It was so lovely that it made you want to cry. This, at last, was the sort of thing that they'd been hoping for. And when, a moment later, several little animals, mice and moles and a squirrel or so, came pattering up, squealing with joy and saying, "See, see, we're here." And when after that the bear and the boar came too, Eustace began to feel that perhaps, after all, everything might be going to come right. There they are. But Tyrion gazed round and saw how very few of the animals had moved. To me, he called. Have you all turned cowards since I was your king? We daren't, whimpered dozens of voices. Tashlon would be angry. Shield us from Tashlon. Where are all the talking horses? Asked Tyrion. We've seen, squealed the mice. The ape has made them work. They're all tied, down at the bottom of the hill. Then all of you little ones, said Tyrion, you nibblers and gnars and nutcrackers, away with you as fast as you can scamper, and see if the horses are on our side. And if they are, get your teeth into the ropes and gnaw till the horses are free, and bring them hither. With a good will, sire, came the small voices, and with a whisk of their tails, those sharp-eyed and sharp-toothed folk were off. Tyrion smiled for mere love as he saw them go. But it was already time to be thinking of other things. Rishta Tarkan was giving his orders to his fighters. Forward, he said. Take all of them alive if you can, and hurl them into the stable or drive them into it. When they are all in it, we will put fire to it and make them an offering to the great god Tash. That is horrible. If that's what Tash is like, Ha, said Farsight the eagle to himself. So that is how he hopes to win Tash's pardon for his unbelief. The enemy line, which was about half of Rishta's force, was now moving forward, and Tyrion barely had time to give out his orders. Out on the left, Jill, and try to shoot all you may before they reach us. Boar and bear next to her. Pagan on my left, Eustace on my right. Hold the right wing, Jewel. Stand by him, Puzzle, and use your hoofs. So Puzzle is fighting. Hover and strike, Farsight. You dogs, just behind us. Go in among them after the swordplay has begun. Aslan to our aid! Eustace stood with his heart beating terribly, hoping and hoping that he would be brave. He had never seen anything, even though he had seen both a dragon and a sea serpent. Remember? But he'd never seen anything that made his blood run so cold as that line of dark-faced, bright-eyed men, the enemies. There were 15 Calormans, a talking bull of Narnia, Slinky the fox, and Raggle the satyr. So they must be fighting against them. And then he heard twang and zzz on his left, and one Calorman fell. Then twang and zzz again, and the satyr was down. Oh, well done, daughter, came Tyrion's voice. And then the enemy were upon them. So that must have been Jill, who used her bow and arrow and got 2 enemies. Eustace could never remember what happened in the next 2 minutes. It was all like a dream, the sort you have when your temperature is over 100, until he heard Rishta Tarkan's voice calling out from the distance. Retire! Back hither! Reform! Then Eustace came to his senses and saw the Calormans scampering back to their friends. But not all of them. 2 lay dead, pierced by Jewel's horn, and 1 by Tyrion's sword. The fox lay dead at his own feet, and he wondered if it was he who had killed it. The bull also was down, shot through the eye by an arrow from Jill, and gashed in his side by the boar's tusk. But our side had its losses too. 3 dogs were killed, and a 4th was hobbling behind the line on 3 legs and whimpering. The bear lay on the ground, moving feebly, and then it mumbled in its throaty voice, bewildered up till the end, I don't understand, and laid its big head down on the grass as quietly as a child going to sleep, and he never moved again. In fact, the first attack had failed. Eustace didn't seem able to be glad about it. He was so terribly thirsty, and his arm ached so. As the defeated Calormans went back to their commander, the dwarfs began jeering at them. Had enough? They yelled. Don't you like it? Why doesn't your grand and great Tarkhan go and fight himself, instead of sending you to be killed? Dwarfs, cried Tyrion, come here and use your swords, not your tongues. There is still time. Dwarfs of Narnia, you can fight well, I know. Come back to your allegiance. Yeah, sneered the dwarfs, not likely. You're just as big humbugs as the other lot. We don't want any kings. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs. And then the drum began. Not a dwarf drum this time, but a big bull's hide Calorman drum. The children from the very first hated the sound. Boom, boom, ba-ba-boom, it went. But they would have hated it far worse if they'd known what it meant. Tyrion did know. It meant that there were other Calorman troops somewhere near, and that Rishta Tarkhan was calling them to his aid. Tyrion and Jewel looked at one another sadly. They had just begun to hope that they might win that night, but it would be all over with them if new enemies appeared. Tyrion gazed despairingly round. Several Narnians were standing with the Calormans, whether through treachery or in honest fear of Aslan. Others were sitting still, staring, not likely to join either side. But there were fewer animals now. The crowd was much smaller. Clearly, several of them had just crept quietly away during the fighting. Boom, boom, ba-ba-boom, went the horrible drum. And then another sound began to mix with it. Listen, said Jewel, and then, look, said Farsight. A moment later, there was no doubt what it was. With a thunder of hoofs, with tossing heads, widened nostrils, and waving manes, over a score of talking horses of Narnia came charging up the hill. The Gnars and the Nibblers had done their work. Poggin the dwarf and the children opened their mouths to cheer, but that cheer never came. Suddenly the air was full of the sound of twanging, bowstrings, and hissing arrows. It was the dwarfs. They were shooting, and for a moment Jill could hardly believe her eyes. They were shooting the horses. Dwarfs are deadly archers. Horse after horse rolled over, and not one of those noble beasts ever reached the king. Little swine, shrieked Eustace, dancing in his rage. Dirty, filthy, treacherous little brutes! Even Jewel said, Shall I run after those dwarfs, sire, and spit 10 of them on my horn at each plunge? But Tyrion, with his face as stern as stone, said, Stand fast, Jewel. If you must weep, sweetheart, and he said this to Jill, turn your face aside and see that you wet not your bowstring. And peace, Eustace. Don't scold like a kitchen girl. No warrior scolds. Courteous words, or else hard knocks are his only language. But the dwarfs jeered back at Eustace. That was surprising for you, little boy, eh? Thought we were on your side, did you? No fear. We don't want any talking horses. We don't want you to win any more than the other gang. You can't take us in. The dwarfs are for the dwarfs. Rishta Tarkhan was still talking to his men, doubtless making arrangements for the next attack, and probably wishing that he had sent his whole force into the first one. The drum boomed on. And then, to their horror, Tyrion and his friends heard, far fainter as if from a long way off, an answering drum. Another body of Calormans had heard Rishta's signal, and they were coming to support him. You would not have known from Tyrion's face that he had now given up all hope. Listen, he whispered in a matter-of-fact voice. "We must attack now, before yonder miscreants are strengthened by their friends." "Bethink you, sire," said Pagan, "that here we have the good wooden wall of the stable at our backs. If we advance, shall we not be encircled and get sword points between our shoulders?" "I would say as you do, dwarf," said Tyrion. "Were it not their very plan to force us into the stable, the further we are from its deadly door, the better." "The king is right," said Farsight. "Away from this accursed stable, and whatever goblin lives inside it, at all costs." "Yes, do let's," said Eustace. "I'm coming to hate the very sight of it." "Good," said Tyrion. "Now, look yonder to our left. You see a great rock that gleams white like marble in the firelight? First, we will fall upon those collarmans. You, maiden, shall move out on our left and shoot as fast as ever you may into their ranks. And you, eagle, fly at their faces from the right. Meanwhile, we others will be charging them. When we are so close, Jill, that you can no longer shoot at them for fear of striking us, go back to the white rock and wait. You others, keep your ears wide, even in the fighting. We must put them to flight in a few minutes, or else not at all, for we are fewer than they. As soon as I call, 'Back!' then rush to join Jill at the White Rock, where we shall have protection behind us and can breathe a while. Now, be off, Jill." Feeling terribly alone, Jill ran out about 20 feet, put her right leg back and her left leg forward, and set an arrow to her string. She wished her hands weren't shaking so much. "That's a rotten shot," she said as her first arrow sped toward the enemy and flew right over their heads. But she had another on the string next moment. She knew that speed was what mattered. She saw something big and black darting into the faces of the Calormans. That was Farsight. First one man, and then another, dropped his sword and put up both hands to defend his eyes. And then one of her own arrows hit a man, and another one hit a Narnian wolf, who had, it seemed, joined the enemy. But she had been shooting only for a few seconds when she had to stop. With a flash of swords and of the boar's tusks and Jewel's horn, and with deep braying from the dogs, Tyrion and his party were rushing on their enemies like men in a 100-yards race. Jill was astonished to see how unprepared the Calormans seemed to be. She didn't realize that this was the result of her work and the eagle's. Very few troops can keep on looking steadily to the front if they're getting arrows in their faces from one side and being pecked by an eagle on the other. "Oh, well done! Well done!" shouted Jill. The king's party were cutting their way right into the enemy. The unicorn was tossing men as you'd toss hay on a fork, or you might call it a rake. Even Eustace seemed to Jill, who after all didn't know very much about swordsmanship, to be fighting brilliantly. The dogs were at the Calormans' throats. It was going to work. It was victory at last. But with a horrible, cold shock, Jill noticed a strange thing. Though Calormans were falling at each Narnian sword stroke, they never seemed to get any fewer. In fact, there were actually more of them now than when the fight began. There were more every second. They were running up from every side. There were new Calormans, and these new ones had spears. There was such a crowd of them that she could hardly see her own friends. And then she heard Tyrion's voice crying, "Back! Back to the rock!" The enemy had been reinforced. The drum had done its work. There was a moment, there were two moments when I thought it was going to end up the way I wanted it to. It's not done though yet. And remember what Tyrion said? We all lie safe between the paws of Aslan. So there is always hope. We'll read 12 next.